On Tuesday, South Africans received the sad news of the death of anti-apartheid struggle stalwart Andrew Mlangeni.
We mourn the departure of Ubaba Andrew Mlangeni Isitwalandwe, one of the last Rivonia trialists who contributed immensely to achieving the freedom that we have achieved. We pass our condolences to his family and to his friends, and indeed to the whole nation.
Mlangeni was the last surviving member of the Rivonia trialists, which included struggle icons such as former President Nelson Mandela, Ahmed Kathrada, Walter Sisulu, Elias Mochwaledi, Govan Mbeki, Raymond Mhlaba, and Dennis Goldberg. They were convicted of sabotage on 11 June 1964, roughly 56 years ago.
The time we spent together on Robben Island, and even outside Robben Island, before we went to Robben Island, it reminded me of our political work that we were doing together with Mandela in the 50s, long before we were arrested.
Described by President Cyril Ramaphosa as Mr. Integrity and the Quiet Revolutionary, Andrew Mlangeni, as he was fondly referred to, will be remembered for being a dedicated and dependable member of the struggle and a true man of the people. As an ANC veteran, Mlangeni was critical of the corruption that had spread under the party's watch.
My heart is bleeding to see what is happening today in the country, that people have become so greedy. People have died for this revolution, for this freedom, the democracy that we have managed to establish. People have died for it.
And that's where we find ourselves this week on The Story, paying tribute to a man who, in the words of Ramaphosa, had a passion for achieving a better society, as well as a passion for a life that is well-rounded, adventurous, healthy, and embracing of people from all walks of life. I am Rian Grobler, senior journalist at News 24, and this is the third season of The Story.
You're listening to The Story. It's a podcast by News 24. We'll speak to journalists and experts about the week's biggest story. This is what we saw, heard, and uncovered this week.
We're chatting to Quinita Hunter, News 24's political editor. Now, she wrote a column this week in which she said Mlangeni never held back from speaking the truth. Hi, Quinita. Please tell us a little bit more about the dealings you've had with Andrew Mlangeni over the past few years.
Well, Rian, I've had the opportunity to engage with Andrew Mlangeni for the better part of a decade. When former President Nelson Mandela passed away, he was pivotal in speaking to him about his comrade and about his time on Robben Island. And then over the course of the years, he would obviously comment on politics, and then he took a position as the co-chair of the ANC's Integrity Committee. And it was that time where I really had an opportunity to engage with him about the politics of the day. But just to say, from the onset, Rian, is that, by that time he was well in his 80s, in early 90s, and that Mlangeni was, really clued up and really in the know about what was happening in the ANC, and also pretty perturbed about what was going on at the height of state capture in about 2016. And he was one of the first ANC veterans to have come out and said, former President Jacob Zuma has to go. And it was not popular at the time. And what stood out for me is that compared to other veterans who were talking to the media and talking to the public and talking to their comrades about their concern about state capture and what Zuma was doing to the country, it was quite fascinating to me that Mlangeni was one of the people that actually sat former President Jacob Zuma down and said to him, hey, you need to stop what you're doing or else you're going to go to jail. And it was almost bizarre to him that the party could even suggest that criticizing a leader for corruption would mean disunity or being ungovernable. It was the most bizarre thing to him. There was a statement he made at his 93rd birthday that sort of, kind of encapsulated where he was in his life, where he said, at my age, I can say what I want to. My age allows me to just say what I want to. And he literally just spoke his truth.
Now, Kunita, apart from his involvement in politics and his outspokenness about the ANC under Jacob Zuma, he was also somebody who liked to spice things up a little bit. To use his words, he was a bit naughty. Could you describe that part of his personality to us?
I love that part of his personality, because he was just so cheeky, and he was just so could care less about what people would think. And there was a lot of his comrades would laugh about how he would talk, naughty talk with them, or he would tease them about things. And we kind of got a real glimpse at this when it was his birthday. President Cyril Ramaphosa was there, and it was a very formal occasion at a restaurant in Sandton, and he then started speaking about his the recipe for a long successful life, and he somehow that conversation turned to his sex life, and it was the most hilarious thing. I still remember Ramaphosa's face, where he just couldn't believe that this elder in the ANC is just talking about the secret to a long life and happy life is sex 3 times a week. It was just the most funny thing as he teased his nephew for being a prude. And I thought that just gave an example of what a well-rounded individual that he was, that he played such an important role in politics and in the liberation of South Africa, spending so many years on Robben Island, and dedicating his life for the liberation of this country. And then in his twilight years, still playing a role in politics, but also just being himself and just being a humble, light-hearted person who never took himself so seriously.
Kunita, as you mentioned, Mlangeni spent 26 years behind bars, and he was described as the quiet revolutionary and the self-proclaimed backroom boy of the struggle. Now, he's the last of the Rivonia trialists to pass away. What sort of legacy do you think Mlangeni leaves behind?
I think the foremost in Mlangeni's legacy is his, him not demanding positions, and him literally being, a backroom boy, someone who was always at the periphery of politics, keeping a keen interest, being a guiding light, but not really, coming in and storming his way through or flexing his place in the anti-apartheid struggle to demand positions and to demand some sort of reverence. And I think that's an incredible legacy to leave behind, because till his death, he was just an ordinary person. And I look at, his celebration of his 95th birthday, which was during lockdown, and how he was just, jolly, sitting with a sash outside his home as, his family and friends drove by to wish him well. And I just thought, that is an incredible example for leaders to just be one of the people, not have a sense of an overinflated ego, someone who could relate to anyone. And I think that the ANC and the country is really, really poorer without him. If you look at, the kind of example that he can lead for the generation of leaders that, of today and of tomorrow, I think the foremost of which is that you cannot live in a bubble of just this inflated ego where you believe you're the alpha and omega of the struggle or the politics of the day. And really, I think that is probably one of his greatest legacies, in that he's an example of how to just be leading from the front.
Well, thank you very much. That was Kunita Hunter, News 24's political editor. To get more insight into Mlangeni's history within the context of South Africa's freedom struggle, we're going to talk to Pieter de Tooy, News 24's assistant editor for In-Depth News. Pieter, give us some background on the role Mlangeni played.
So Andrew Mlangeni, the death of Andrew Mlangeni is a pretty big moment in the ANC's history. I don't know if the party actually realizes that, but Mlangeni was the very last of the old Rivonia trialists who were surviving Rivonia trialists. So in that sense, an umbilical cord between today's ANC and the liberation movement of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So they were the embodiment of the ANC and the majority of South Africans' freedom struggle. They were arrested at Lily's Leaf Farm, which in the 1960s was situated in Rivonia, a small holding area north of Johannesburg. These days, Rivonia is in the middle of Joburg. But they were arrested by security police in the early 60s after the security police got wind of anti-government operations being planned by Umkhonto weSizwe, of which Nelson Mandela was a senior commander. They worked clandestinely in the 60s, trying to get the armed struggle going. At that stage, the apartheid government, having passed laws like the Anti-Communism Act, a whole raft of anti-black laws, the ANC was trying very hard to get the armed struggle going. And Lily's Leaf Farm, owned by the Walperts, who were prominent members of the Communist Party of South Africa, as they were known back then, they housed a number of these MK operatives. And then one night, when everyone was there, they were arrested and promptly charged with treason. Andrew Mlangeni was part of that group. He was a junior member, according to Nelson Mandela. He was never a senior member or leader of MK at that stage. But he became part of that group of very prominent ANC leaders who stood trial in Pretoria at the Palace of Justice, facing Justice Quartus de Wet, who was the presiding judge. And he was also sentenced to life imprisonment on Robben Island. So there was a big cohort of senior ANC leaders, obviously led by Nelson Mandela, who were banished to Robben Island. And Andrew Mlangeni was part of that group. Now, why his death is significant is because he was the last remaining and surviving member of the Rivonia group, and as such represented a different time, represented a different kind of leadership. So the historical perspective, I think, is very important, because he does represent something which the ANC clearly is not anymore.
The trial was also covered by media organizations from all over the world that led to pressure from the international community to have South Africa banished from a number of organizations in the years that followed the trial. Please tell us more about how the trial was a catalyst in the country's history.
Absolutely. The Rivonia trial was extremely high profile, covered by the international media, and there was pressure on the judiciary to impose the death sentence, of course. That was the ultimate penalty for treason. The decision to sentence them to life imprisonment, of course, made them martyrs. They became a focal point of the global anti-apartheid movement. If they were executed, this country's history might have turned out much differently than it did. But what it did was it banished prominent members of the ANC to this desolate island off the coast of Cape Town in the cold Atlantic, and they became symbols of the strive for freedom in South Africa. And Mlangeni, he became part of that group of mythical leaders almost. No one saw them for 30 years. No one heard from them for 30 years. And once they were released in 1989-90, they became the conscience of the liberation movement. And with his passing, the umbilical cord with Rivonia, with the type of leadership that was embodied by Nelson Mandela and others, has now been cut. The ANC has now been cast adrift and is now being led by people who weren't part of that history, and I think it's a problem for the party.
That was Pieter de Tooy, News 24's assistant editor for In-Depth News. And that's it from us this week. I'm Rian Grobler, and this episode was produced by Shante Schatz. Special thanks to City Press and Getty Images for supplying this podcast with audio of Andrew Mlangeni.